Hey everybody, it's Matt Johnson. We are back with the latest edition of the Pursuing Results podcast. We appreciate you being here. This is where we interview successful people about one book that changed their life. And we've got a great guest, and we're going to talk about a really interesting book today. We'll get to him in just a second. But before that, I want to bring in my co-host and partner in all things crime and non-crime related, Greg McDaniel. Greg, what's up today?
Matt, what's going on, man? It is always a pleasure to hang out with you, and we got a killer guest, man. I'm super pumped for what he's going to bring to the table today. I got to tell you, though, man, a lot of people, what they fail to do to succeed in life is to do follow-up and to be persistent and consistent at the hard things, the unsexy, the unfun things to do and work. But I came in sliding with my hair on fire today, because I went up and I was doing hardcore prospecting calls last week. I was getting my butt kicked all week. And then I met a really cool older couple. And after going out there and meeting with them and hanging out with them, I'm going to help them sell their house and then help them buy another house. So persistence rules, man. It's awesome. And they're super nice, too. That's the coolest part about it.
Good.
Yeah, so I'm happy.
All right, good. Well, I'm glad you're happy today.
Oh, good.
So let's bring in our special guest, who I connected with on LinkedIn through Marguerite Crespilla. Which, if you pay attention to our other podcast, Real Estate Uncensored, you know that she was a previous guest of that show, and then I brought her onto one of our other podcasts, and she's been phenomenal. She had me and Greg on her show, and anyway, we connected with Michael through her on LinkedIn, and Michael is a fellow podcast host and into the personal development field, and so. Michael Benner. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, Matt. Thanks very much. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so you're up in LA. You've been, in the radio business and in the podcasting game for a long time. So for those that don't know you, and there may be people in our audience here in California that already know who you are, but for those that don't, can you give us a little bit background on yourself? Kind of who you are, where you are, and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I moved to Los Angeles in the mid-1970s from Michigan. I was a young man in my early 20s, had just graduated from Michigan State, was doing some radio in Detroit, and I wanted to go to a major market where there was no snow.
That sounds like me a year and a half ago.
Where nobody knew what a snow shovel even was. And so I thought, well, New York's a big market, but it snows. Chicago, same thing. I guess it's going to have to be L.A. And besides, Annette Funicello and the Beach Boys, and I mean, everything is in. I bought into that whole California myth, and I've been here ever since, and no regrets, man. I just love it. I lived 5 years in Maui, and my wife missed her grandkids a lot, so. We came back to L.A. and just love it. Really, it's been good to me.
I'm a fifth-generation Californian, so it is literally in my blood to live in this state. And I've traveled to other states and immediately get a sneezing attack, and I rush back to California because no place like home,
Well, you gotta like the desert to live in Southern California. And
yeah, you do.
We really do.
All you Southern SoCal folks are taking all of us NorCal people's water. And I was
sorry, man. We're thirsty.
That's right. We got stuff to do down here. Yeah. All right, so Michael, tell us a little bit about the podcast that you host, and maybe a little bit about your experience in the personal development field.
Well, thanks. About the time that I turned 40 in the mid-'80s, I realized that radio was rather a young man's game, and I was being aged out of it. And after being released, I'll say it that way, from ABC, I worked at KABC and KLOS for a little over 10 years here in LA, doing talk shows, a little bit of news, but mostly current events-based talk shows. And so I took my severance pay and I moved up to the mountains, got a little cabin. It was just me and my golden retriever and my shortwave ham radio. I was in paradise. I loved it. And I used that probably a year and a half period to decide, well, what are you going to do with the second half of your life? Felt like halftime, right? Mm-hmm. And what kept coming up to me, my primary avocation and real hobby outside of radio was meditation and self-hypnosis and raising awareness with deep relaxation and stress reduction. And every time I would sit on the porch at night and look at the stars and listen to the coyotes howl and ask myself again, what are you going to do now? You know, that kept coming up. So I put together a little program and I began to teach individuals and couples and eventually doing corporate seminars and work with small business in the whole personal development field, particularly around self-awareness and emotional intelligence.
Interesting. And so how did that lead to, where did the podcast come into play, the Ageless Wisdom podcast?
Well, as you can see by the microphone, I'm sort of an audio guy. I've got radio in my blood. I mentioned amateur radio. I started that when I was 12. I started commercial radio when I was 18. I worked my way through college as a radio guy and majored in television and radio. It's the only thing I've ever done, you know, up until the personal development work. So when podcasts came along about 2005 or so, I immediately jumped on it. And that's part of why we thought we could go to Hawaii for 5 years. I thought, well, maybe I could do a premium podcast and or use a podcast to promote some premium audio and live in Hawaii. And again, it worked fine for about 5 years until my wife has children from a previous marriage. I don't want to make it sound like I did not miss my own children, you know, but we only came back because her kids and her grandkids, she just really missed them a lot. And Hawaii is a long way away, man.
Yes, it is.
5.5 hours by air from LA. And all the people who said we're going to come and visit you, few ever did.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that makes sense. It's tough when you've got a family to put all of them on a plane. Yeah. So
I started the podcast in, I think, 2007, and I've done it ever since. We have about 380 episodes on iTunes now.
Nice. Very, very cool.
It's called the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School, and it's part personal development and part esoteric philosophy, which has a transpersonal or spiritual overtone to it. But what unifies it is identity, who we really are, what we're really about.
You know, I started studying you know, a lot of that stuff. You know, energy clearing meditation. I do the meridian tapping, clearing stuff out of my own personal body. You know, doing the Sedona method in public. If something bothers me, just letting it go right away. Is that some of the stuff that you kind of go over and cover and stuff like that?
Yeah, but remember, given your orientation to business and real estate and such, there is the Napoleon Hill material, Think and Grow Rich.
Very much,
Dale Carnegie, for example, and Norman Vincent Peale. And business people have always been interested in personal development and self-awareness. So that's definitely part of it.
You know, it totally is. And when I started getting more and more into that in Napoleon Hill and reading those books, I'm sitting there going, like, oh my gosh, this is exactly, you know, when it comes back to meditation and energy releasing and, you know, focusing on positivity and not you know, nothing negative. And I'm like, God, all these super multi-billionaire guys, you know, were able to do this stuff. Why is nobody else doing this stuff? Why is it not taught mainstream? Why is this not like a course in college or a course in high school you should take? Get people, you know, heading down that path.
I've asked that question of myself countless times, and the biggest and by far the most primary answer that continues to come up for me is that most women and men are frankly terrified to face the truth of who they are.
Yeah.
And I often remind my students and clients, hey man, the game is rigged. Look at nature. Where do you find anything that is ugly or defective in nature? In fact, imperfection has perfection within it. If you and I come out of a forest into a clearing, especially if we're photographers, let's say, and there's one perfect conifer out there, magnificent Christmas tree, and a twisted old gnarly oak tree all burned up one side, which one are you going to point your camera at?
Probably the nice side.
It's going to be the one with character, the gnarly, twisted, old, burned up oak tree, not not perfection. In fact, the Greeks discovered a little over 2,000 years ago that the reason their sculptures didn't look right was they were symmetrical, and none of us are. The left side of our body is very different from the right side. It's similar.
Very true.
So there, it was too perfect. It was so perfect it wasn't even interesting or realistic.
Perfection is an imperfection, and that's one of the paradoxes. So every one of us is perfect exactly who we are. We bring particular gifts and talents and abilities to this lifetime. And if we're going to be successful and happy, we're going to have to face who we are. And I think it helps to know that it's a win-win game. You're not going to find out that your parents were right and you really are inadequate and bad and ugly and no good at this.
We need to work on parenting skills first off.
Well, there's that too.
I see the major flaw there.
I have a lot to say about that. That could be another program.
Yeah.
But we have these echoes in our heads and these fears that we're not good enough. And we're far too oriented, most of us, toward pleasing other people and gaining their acceptance than being true to who we really are. And so whether it's a successful business and prosperity, whether it's a successful loving relationship, successful parenting, or anything else, just general happiness. I strongly believe, and I have a TED Talk about this online, that many of us are confused about success and we think it's a path to happiness. Actually, happiness is the path to success. Happiness and fulfillment comes from loving relationships at business as well as at home. And that requires that we understand ourselves before we can empathize and be leaders of other people.
Yeah, I did one thing, Michael, a long time ago. I actually took that leap personally, and I jumped in with both feet wearing boots into the deep end, and I really was, pulled the sheet back and, all right, who am I? I really wanted to take a look at it. It was definitely terrifying. It was also very rewarding at the exact same time, because then as soon as you have the balls to actually do that leap and taking off the kimono, as you can say, and here you are in all your glory, then it's like, okay, this is who I am. Now you have a base to build off of. And everybody, I think, in society in today's day and age has had their expectations set up here, because you watch all the movie stars and celebrities and everything else. They're all pretty and doing all this stuff for the most part. So if you're anything less than this, then you suck. But in reality, like you said, there's no imperfection in nature. So you just got to understand where you are and just maintain that is where you are, where you need to be. You're playing a specific role in this whole thing of life and in the circle of life.
And nothing is more natural than growth.
Right.
We're all evolving. We can accelerate it consciously, but even if we dig in our heels and say no, we're going to grow in spite of ourselves. So if that's what it's about, I figure giddy up, let's get going. Let's ride that pony, right?
Yeah.
Growth is what it's about. And that means shedding the stuff that doesn't work.
Yeah.
I'm writing a book called Fearless Intelligence. It should be out early next year. And in that book, I make a point. In fact, the theme of the book, you guys, is that we believe fear is a signal of danger. And many of us, we carry stress, anxiety, and fear with us because of the myth that that's a way to be careful. In fact, fear signals what we do not know about our situation and ourselves, whether dangerous or not. Which is why so often people say, hey, man, what are you worried about? Why are you so stressed? And most people say, well, I really don't know. Well, that's the point. That's what fear is. Fear is the feeling of not understanding things, dangerous or not. And at the center of what we don't understand is the self. So by facing the fear, we know the self. Said another way, in order to know thyself, we have to find the fear and move directly into the belly of the beast.
Well, it's also very, very therapeutic in my opinion. When you actually take it and you face fear, you look whatever it is dead in the eyes, and then you have the strength to go towards it and not run away from it. You'll see most of the time it is not half as big as what you actually thought it was to be. Fear was your true enemy, not the actual object or issue.
Yeah, fear is a shadow. Plato talks about it in his allegory of the cave 2,500 years ago. It's like sitting in front of a fire, and a little mouse runs and casts a shadow the size of an elephant, a monstrous shadow on the wall, but it's just a little mouse. And you're right. That's exactly how fear works. It's just the brain trying to get your attention and say, hey, here's something you need to know.
Yeah, Matt, you and I were, Jay Sammet encouraged us to pick out 3 things that irritated us or we were afraid of or something. And, then you could go and you could turn it into a big company. But the fact that the whole exercise, I believe, was to look at something that you might have been afraid of and then try to find a way to debunk it or a way to conquer it. When you start changing the way you look at everything and you gamify it and you're like, okay, this is something I'm afraid of, or this is something I don't like, or blah, 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 then you can move towards that thing with a different mindset. Therefore, it goes from the scary creature on the wall back down to the mouse. And you no longer.
Well, yeah, and you build up. I think, like you said, Michael, it's the fear of the unknown, where as long as you keep growing, there's always going to be more things to fear because there's more. You're always stepping into some aspect of the unknown. But the more you have a track record behind you of stepping into the unknown and figuring it out, you can feel the fear and have more confidence that, well, yeah, I understand that I have the feeling of not knowing, but I have this reservoir of confidence that I've dealt with this feeling in the past, and it's never as bad as the feeling itself, and I can go ahead. It's not paralyzing. I can move forward.
You guys got it. If we ever find ourselves in a position where we're not sure what to do or which direction to move in, it's directly into what frightens you most.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it's. I'm trying to remember if it was. I think it was Grant Cardone that said something to that effect. That fear can be used as a guide to know what the next direction, the right direction is. And he's speaking in terms of business, but it's because that's an expression of your personal development, which is funny because all business development is personal development, especially when you come into the entrepreneurial world where you have so much direct control over what the expression of the business is. But he talks about how he uses fear as a guiding light, or as a guide to, well, I should be moving towards what fears me because that is the next natural, logical step in the business. If I'm doing things that don't scare me, then I'm staying within my comfort zone. I'm not going to get the results that I want. So that's really stuck with me ever since I came across that. Great concept.
Guys like Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn and other business-oriented personal development people make it real clear that we should work on ourselves 4 times as much as on the business, because we are the business. And without people skills, without relationships, without the ability to empathize and understand others, you cannot be a leader. You cannot inspire. You're not going to be very good at selling because you're trying to sell a product when you should be selling yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's 100%. So that old fizzle, not the steak thing.
Quote. Yeah, exactly.
If you're in real estate, you could sell houses or you could sell homes.
I'll sell homes because a house is very, very removed. A home is much more intimate,
exactly.
And it attracts that sense of love, family, intimacy.
There you go.
It's much more emotional based,
That's
and
it.
you can talk about that.
Yeah, and that goes back to understanding the business that you're really in. Insurance isn't the business of selling insurance. Insurance is peace of mind. Real estate is the same way. You're selling a dream. You're selling a feeling, a sense of ownership, a sense of community. And yeah, it's understanding the business you're in is always a good exercise, is to ask yourself that question: what business am I really in? Mm-hmm. Which is I've come across that in a lot of books. But before we run out of time, I want to make sure that we actually cover the book, Michael, that you brought and that you wanted to point out to us. So this was Richard Bach's Illusions, right?
Yes, it changed my life in many ways. The book was written in 1977 by Richard Bach, who is a Air Force fighter pilot, Many people know him as the author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And he was born and raised in Southern California and used to swim off the jetty in Newport Beach. And he would get down real low behind the rocks and watch the seagulls. And that led to his interest in flight, joining the Air Force, later being a barnstorming pilot, which is the premise of this novel, Illusions. He meets another barnstorming pilot in a field who turns out to be a kind of a messiah or a guru to him, a fellow named Don Shimoda. And throughout the novel, you go along with these two as Shimoda counsels the author, Richard Bach, on the fact that what we see as a hard, firm, empirical reality is much more a projection of our thoughts, feelings, and the consciousness behind it. That life is what you make it is much more literal than most of us realize. And that life can conspire to support you. Life really wants to support you once you understand the basic cybernetic nature of the mind. And I'll give you a quick example, not from the book, but my own teaching. If I say to each of you not to do something, if I say to you, do not, no matter what, do not think of a purple elephant.
Damn it, I just thought of a purple elephant.
Of course.
And of course, if I suggest, imagine a purple elephant, it's exactly the same. So when we say things like, I hope I don't forget, we're planting the seed in our mind of forgetting. When we say, sure hope I don't blow this sail, you're planting the seed of failure in your mind. And this is why positive thinking is so much more than a psychology. Athletes know this. There's a tragic story from years ago of Sonny Bono skiing down a slope and smashing into a tree. It took his life. Well, I know what he was thinking just before he hit the tree. Oh no, I hope I don't hit the tree. What any skier will tell you, or a motorcyclist or a skateboarder, is that you have to look in the direction you want to go, not at what you wish to avoid. So in business or anywhere else in life, if we look at what we wish to avoid, we're going to continue to create it. We have to look at what we really do want, because that's just the way the mind works. And occasionally we can do things we can't imagine, sort of inadvertently or by accident. But basically, you've got to be able to imagine success, feel it in your bones, believe in it. Close your eyes, visualize yourself driving that car, living in that house, putting that check in the bank, having loving relationships and beautiful families. I mean, Tony Robbins in our generation is just excellent. He's an NLP master. He pulls on neuro-linguistic programming, which is all emotionally based. And so, as Napoleon Hill said, you must conceive it and believe it in order to achieve it.
I couldn't agree with you more. I actually carry around a dream book here, and I am very specific on certain things. I have like family, friends, business, everything else in here. And I have seen incredible things take place, Michael, when I spend time in, putting positive, energy towards specific things in life. It's just, bam, all of a sudden, just things you could never, ever, ever imagine would take place, and doors would open.
And one little additional piece of information, when we move from a win-lose mentality to a win-win mentality, when we design our goals so that they benefit everyone concerned, not just the self, then the universe totally conspires to support you in that goodness.
Yeah, once you meet, the biggest place to start with that, and Michael, I'm sure you'll agree with me, and if you don't, I'd love to hear your opinion on it, is that you just have to get going. You literally just have to decide, make a decision that you're going to make a movement towards something, and you're going to make a different, and you're going to make a move towards it, because your conscious and subconscious is like your is like a undercurrents in the ocean. They're always flowing. You just don't always see them there. Your conscious mind is like the waves. They can ebb and flow. But if you can get your subconscious to grasp hold of this new idea of where you want to go in life, it will pull you along, and your conscious brain will be like, oh, we should go over here. When they start working in harmony together. I've seen
spot opportunities that were probably there, but you would have never spotted otherwise.
Well, it's like the red car scenario, right?
That's a trap a lot of people fall into, is they believe that other people are lucky, they believe that other people get opportunities, but they don't, and it's really a matter of them not committing to the result or the outcome that they want, to the point where they actually start to spot and recognize the opportunities when they come up.
Yeah, and you can see how that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Other people are lucky, not me. And life goes, all right, we can do that.
Here you go. We can serve that up.
We can give you that. If everything stinks. Okay, we can create that for you if that's what you want. Right.
One of my favorite sayings is, the man who thinks he can and the man who thinks he can't are both generally right.
They're both right. I think that's Edison.
I think it is Edison.
Yeah. Either Edison or Ford. Yeah, I think it's one of those ones that bounces around and been attributed to a lot of people probably.
It's Greg McDaniel.
Either way, it's true.
So Richard Bach's book, he wrote a dozen, and everybody knows the Seagull book, but I think Illusions is just game-changing. It just blew my mind, and it led to my fascination. I always had an interest, but just exploded my fascination in, man, if life is a canvas and I'm the painter. In fact, I also have colored pencils and film projectors and all this media at my disposal inside my head, and I can project my reality onto that screen. Mm-hmm. Why am I sitting here feeling like a victim? Why am I judging other people? Why am I desiring their life when I have my own, and I've got DNA evidence and fingerprint proof that I'm unique? And I saw a greeting card once that said, congratulations, you're unique just like everybody else.
I like that. That's awesome.
That might be the most profound greeting card I've ever heard.
It's pretty deep.
That's great. You're unique, just like everybody else.
Yeah.
That's incredible, though. Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me of, so speaking of Jay Samit, he was one of the very first guests we had on this podcast, and do you remember the book, The Peter Principle?
Sure.
Yeah, so that had the exact same effect on him. So he read it as a 10-year-old, and it exploded his worldview, and he realized that, wait a minute, these people in charge they're not masters of the universe. They're just people like me trying to do the best they can, and some of them are advanced beyond their position, and it completely changed his view of what reality is, and he realized that he had way more power to create the life that he wanted, and that always stuck with him. And I wish I would have come to that knowledge sooner. So I was raised in a very religious upbringing. Greg knows this because we've talked about it. But yeah, I had a very fatalistic, not in a negative sense necessarily, but just that I wasn't the captain of my own ship necessarily. Where I've come to believe now, I haven't let go of the religious views, but I've come to realize that I think God created us to be fellow creators, and starting with our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
There is a overlooked Gnostic gospel, because most organized Christianity is based on Constantine and the Catholic Church, and they've only got 4 books, basically. Yeah. But there are these Gnostic Gospels that were burned by Constantine and were discovered in the 40s, Dead Sea Scrolls, Nag Hammadi. One of them, the Book of Thomas, Christ is very clear about the need to know yourself. And the whole idea that everyone is a child of God, that these things I do, you can do and more. So you don't have to divorce yourself from spirituality to be successful in the material world. Quite the contrary. I think the two align and dovetail nicely once you get an elevated perspective of the teachings of all the great masters. Christ and Buddha, the similarities to those two guys and what they teach, and how both of them are rooted in ancient Hebrew text and Vedantist texts in the East. The same thing is being said. It's only when we get into the dogma of organized religion that it begins to get rigid and inflexible. They're not wrong, just maybe incomplete.
Yeah.
Interesting
perspective. I like it. Well, we could, that's a whole other. We could go down that rabbit hole. We'd be on a podcast for 3 hours. All right. Well, Michael, this has been fantastic. So remind people of how they can take a step towards you. How can they get the Ageless Wisdom podcast and hear more of your thoughts?
Well, just a Google search, I think, The Ageless Wisdom, or Michael Benner. That's B like boy, ENNER. A search in iTunes or a general Google search will come up with the podcast. We're also on Stitcher, which is a good mobile app and works on Android as well as iOS and computer. And that's for the on-demand people, that don't necessarily want to download and use up their memory. Stitcher even has a play later button. Yep. So you can sort of bookmark the programs, and
same thing with the new the new podcasting app that comes standard on all the new iPhones, and they have been coming on that for me. I think maybe the last generation, the 6. So iPhone's podcast app has that as well. So all of the podcasts that I follow, every time I sit my phone down on Wi-Fi, it's set to just download all the shows that I'm subscribed to. So they've kind of caught up with that, which is really nice.
And we're in most of the major podcast directories as well. So just the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School. My website is The Ageless Wisdom. The THE is part of it. TheAgelessWisdom.com. And Fearless Intelligence should be out the first of next year.
Awesome. Yeah. We'll have to have you back. I'm sure there's another book you could talk about that's been life-changing that we can use as an excuse to bring you back on the show.
I'm a reader. In fact, I even have a speed reading method that my partner developed about 35, 40 years ago that is different from any other. And,
interesting.
It's not
does it involve Greg listening to books on tape?
At times 2 speed.
I'll tell you something about that since you brought that up. Book sales are down, which is tragic. Ebook sales are down, but I just read the other day that audiobook sales are up 35% this year alone.
Wow. Yeah, I'll bet. It's all
just because of society, everyone's moving too fast.
Yeah, we're multitasking. We want things to do.
Yeah. We can't have a single second where we don't have some sort of. As much as I love podcasts and audiobooks, there does need to be some time for silence.
Meditation, silence is golden, no question.
Yeah. That's right. No. All right, guys. Well, we will put a nice little bow on this one. Make sure to subscribe to Pursuing Results podcast as well if you're not already on YouTube, iTunes, or Stitcher. We're all on the major platforms as well. Make sure to subscribe to the Ageless Wisdom podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. And until next time, we'll see everybody on the next podcast.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.